Okay, so I'm going to start with a question. And this is the same question I start every user testing session I run at NPR with. How does public radio fit into your life? So I want you to take a few seconds to think about that. And would anyone like to volunteer to come up and talk with me about that? Come on up. Okay, so we're going to do like a little mock user research session. Let's see. Just grab this real quick. All right. Okay.
You want to sit down?
Yeah, you sit down. All right. Whoa. A little acrobatics here today. So how does NPR, public radio rather, fit into your life, if at all? So I'm not going to assume it does.
I listen to a lot of public radio while I'm driving.
Okay. So how did you first discover public radio?
Scan button on the radio.
Okay. So you just found it on the sort of the low end of the dial.
Yep.
Okay. So did you ever? Did your parents listen to public radio? Did you ever?
Nope, absolutely not.
Okay, great. And around when did you discover public radio?
Probably 18, 19-ish,
Okay.
right after high school.
So tell me about a typical day. Like, do you listen to public radio every day?
Yeah, I would say so. In the mornings when I drive to work, and then when I get to work, I don't listen to the radio anymore because I can't. And then when I leave work, I turn on the radio and listen to the radio.
Okay, so it's all pretty much in your car?
Yeah, pretty much on the
Or
commute.
commuting?
When I get home, it turns to Spotify, unfortunately, for
Okay.
public radio. But
Okay, great. So thanks to Gary.
Sure.
This would go on for many, many minutes, so this is not, we're going to cover a lot more. You can go back to your seat. Thanks. So thanks to Gary. So a radio listener, right? So someone who listens to NPR on the radio. So I'm asking another question. What is innovation? What does it mean to you? Does anyone want to offer a definition for me? There we go. A new way of doing something? Okay. Anyone else?
That satisfies real needs in the real world.
Okay, something that satisfies real needs, so not just innovation for innovation's sake. It's an improvement. Okay. Anyone else? Right? Okay, so I also was interested in what this means because honestly, every time I hear someone say the word innovation, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. Because compared to what? What does that mean? You know, is it in relation to something else? Are you innovative? Have you been innovative in the past? Are you innovative right now? Are there any guarantee you're going to be innovative into the future? So this is a story from Planet Money. How many people listen to Planet Money? Wow, okay, that's quite a number of you. Do you listen to it just on the radio in your commute, for instance? Do you hear it? Or do you subscribe to the podcast? Podcasts, okay, so a lot of podcast listeners. Do you listen to it in an app at all? Other than like a podcast? Okay. What app do you use? Okay, so our app, all right. So a few different ways. Tune in. Okay, I use Overcast a lot. I also use NPR One. How many people use NPR One? How many people don't know what NPR One is? Wow, that's a lot of people. Okay. So this is a story from Planet Money, an episode. So Planet Money a few years ago did a project where they wanted to make a T-shirt because they wanted to trace the manufacturing of that T-shirt from the very beginning, from picking the cotton all the way through the distribution and the arrival of the T-shirt at their offices. So this is one of those stories. So what do you think, and the title of this episode is The Humble Innovation at the Heart of the Global Economy. Can anyone guess what the humble innovation is that's at the heart of the global economy? What's that? Okay. Right, a box, right, a shipping container. How many of you before you saw the headline, would have thought this is innovative? Okay, a few people. Why? Okay, solves a real problem. Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, exactly. So that, what we're hearing, I'm hearing sort of a definition for innovation evolving, but maybe if someone just saw this picture, would most, a couple of people raised their hand when they thought that that a box was innovative. So boxes, the unsung innovation at the heart of the global economy. All right, so in this case, we talked about a few of those of the qualities that make this box innovative, but also the story revealed that what's really innovative here is that it has reduced the cost of the shipping because they can put the T-shirt in the container. The container can be put on a ship. It can be put on a truck. It can on a train, and it can arrive without having to be touched. Nothing else has to happen to it. So the cost of the shipping because of that container was a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall cost of the T-shirt once it arrived to a consumer. So that's one definition. Let's look at another story. So this is the TED Radio Hour, and this is a story about limited resources. So does having fewer resources, does that actually contribute and lead to better innovation? So I'm not going to go into what the story was about, but I will say, just as I think someone in the audience said, if we look at the comment section, so our commenters can say the most interesting, insightful things. We also have trolls, right? So we have commenters who say terrible things. But occasionally you'll see something like this, where it says, this man's ideas are great if you want to waste time innovating things that aren't useful. So who said the thing about useful? It actually needs to be useful, right? All right, so maybe being innovative is actually creating something useful. All right, so let's look at the definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, the OED. To make changes in something established, especially by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. So the example they give is the company's failure to diversify and innovate competitively, or to introduce something new, especially a product. Innovating new products, developing existing ones. All right, so innovate competitively. So by nature, what we're seeing here is that it's in comparison or competition to something else. So are you innovative because you are doing things, introducing new things, whereas maybe your competitor is not, or is not creating things that are as useful, perhaps? All right, so compared to what? Like who are we comparing ourselves to? So for NPR, who do you think we would compare ourselves to in terms of our innovation? Any examples? BBC, CBC, okay, so a lot of the broadcasting networks. What's that?
New York Times.
New York Times, right? So what about the New York Times? What about what they do? General news. Anything else?
National.
Okay. Do they have a lot of audio? They have some audio, right? So there's a podcast. They have other audio on the site, but it's certainly not as much as we do. Anyone else have any ideas who were? Okay. Someone say CBS? Huffington Post, PBS? Spotify. Right. So maybe not delivering news, although you can probably listen to news through Spotify in some ways. But it's a competition for your attention, right? Okay? Gary talked about listening to public radio in the car, coming home, and then switching to Spotify. So we talked about some of NPR's innovation competitors. What companies or organizations do you consider innovative? Apple? Why? So you said Apple, why?
They think different.
Great. They've created a perception of innovation, right? Of being innovative.
They answer the question why.
Why?
How.
How? Okay. Someone else other than Apple, what are we?
Tesla.
Tesla, okay. Why Tesla?
Thinking of the future, thinking about going to Mars, thinking about electric cars.
Okay,
So that's going to help the environment.
okay.
Thinking ahead to what we need in the future.
Right, so they are ensuring by the work they do, and honestly, you've seen evidence of the things they're planning for the future that says we're an organization, we have set ourselves up to continue to be innovative over time, right? So maybe they produced a car, that was an innovative event, but maybe in 10 years, as competitors create other electric cars, do other things, maybe that's not innovative anymore. But if people are still driving that car, maybe that's innovation that still matters, right? Okay, so we asked the why question and the how question. Is NPR innovative? Don't hold back. Just bring it on. If you believe it or if you don't believe it, tell me, and tell me why.
To me, it seems like they are in their partnerships, but maybe not in their own content.
Okay, so content meaning the storytelling or the way the content's delivered? Storytelling, okay. Why do you think that?
Well, I think they do a great job, like partnering with other podcasts that do like really interesting content, and you like associate it with NPR, even though they're not the ones producing it.
Give me an example of one of those podcasts.
Serial.
Serial, okay. All right, so do you believe that Serial is innovative? Or the group that produces it, so This American Life in conjunction with WBZ, that they are innovative. Why are they innovative? What makes that innovative?
I think so traditionally podcasts haven't tapped into the entertainment factor in that way.
Okay,
I think they were taking a medium that people sort of used, but bringing a different audience into it.
okay, great. So I've thought a lot about Serial because I want to understand why that has been so successful. And I'm going to throw out a lot of assumptions today. This entire presentation are mostly assumptions, and I'm going to talk about how NPR has actually developed a culture where assumptions are a good thing, and that actually helps us do the work we do without fighting and getting angry at each other. But my assumption is that our brains are always detecting intentions. So what is the intention of Sarah Koenig? What is her intention? And she says this during the Serial podcast. If you listen closely, she says, I'm maybe not in these words, but she's trying to do good journalism. Like she's trying to do reporting. There are interviews she's done several interviews about her work, and it comes out even more, right? So her intention, I think, is to do good journalism. There are other popular podcasts. There are other popular things to listen to, which are, in my view, competition for mind space, for people's attention, right? Say comedy podcasts. Who likes comedy podcasts? Okay, what's your favorite comedy podcast? Thank you.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. So I listened to that podcast. I like the podcast. If you haven't heard Mark Maron interviewing Terry Gross at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, so that is both, there's a version on his podcast, which may be the full-length one, and then on Fresh Air, you can actually hear the same interview. And you can hear interviews with Mark Maron talking about the interviews. No, he did the one with Obama. Which one? The combination of the two of them. Exactly, right. So when I first listened to Mark Maron's podcast, I just thought he was kind of annoying, right? I knew him as a comedian, right? I'd heard good things about the podcast, but I didn't really get it. He just seemed sort of cranky and, self-concerned and really trying. Listen to interviews with him and then listen to more of the podcasts where he actually reveals this. And Jay heard this in a talk I gave not too long ago, where I realized that his intention when he started the podcast was to kind of work through his own stuff, right? So he's trying to talk to celebrities. Initially, it was like, I'm like, why are you so successful? I kind of want to be that successful. What's going on here? So that was his intention, but it was a real, like, I don't think it's necessarily, maybe it's not could be perceived as a positive intention, but it is a real human intention, and you hear that in his voice. So you begin to trust the voice because you at least think the intention is honest. As he's evolved, he really wants to have his guests kind of reveal the same sort of, whatever their sort of angsty thing that sort of, I don't know, made them successful or made them an interesting person, that comes out in the interview. So I think that's why they're successful. So where was I going with all this? So my belief in terms of NPR being innovative is that there is a core value and the core quality that's with NPR that is the same thing that's within Serial, right? But maybe you don't see it because maybe you're, and I'm saying you in particular, but maybe someone who's been introduced through something that seems like public radio through Serial because they weren't a backseat baby. They didn't grow up, this is a term we use for people who grew up in the backseat, strapped into their car seat, forced to listen to NPR. And then I interview people all the time doing user research, and sometimes I'll hear the story of like, yeah, so NPR's been part of my life since I can remember. I was strapped in the back seat. I remember listening to Car Talk. How many of you were strapped in the back seat listening to Car Talk or whatever, right? How many of you listen to NPR now and enjoy it or engage with it because of that? How many of you can't stand it because of that? Okay, no one's going to admit that, but I've seen several people who sort of have that reaction. It's like, yeah, it was torture. Maybe you get something going on with their folks, their family. Maybe it had nothing to do with NPR, right? Okay, so this is online. This is not on the NPR website. It's on the National Public Media website, which is an organization that actually lives in the NPR building, a separate organization that runs all of our sponsorship. So we don't have advertising per se, we have sponsorship. We have folks on the air, the things you hear on the radio, the sponsorship creatives you see on the website. So this is a part of how NPR sustains itself as an organization through sponsorship. So they have a need for NPR. They also do this work for PBS, by the way. They have a need to make sure that NPR is perceived as being innovative, because there are plenty of other folks that those sponsors could give their money to and support. So this is sort of a timeline. So just wanted to give you a sense of how NPR might be perceived as being innovative over time. So it was founded in 1970. The first broadcast was in 1971 with coverage of the hearings on the Vietnam War. Overseas Bureau, 1994, NPR.org launches. And that's pretty early for a news website that offers audio or offers news stories. How many of you recognize that guy at the top? He was on The Simpsons on Friday. That's Bob Boilen, who is one of the hosts of All Songs Considered, as well as one of the two folks who created the Tiny Desk. How many people know what a Tiny Desk concert is? A lot of you. Great. I was talking to Jeff earlier, and he said, I have a request. I want a Tiny Desk app that just allows me to watch the videos of all the Tiny Desk concerts and then show them to other people. And I didn't tell them at the time, but the NPR Music iPhone app, which I actually designed it, and we launched 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, has those in it. So there already is an app that does that. We haven't done a lot to it since then because our users of that app versus products like NPR, we have limited resources, right? So we're putting a lot of effort into other things. Music needs some attention. The music apps need some attention. I'll be the first to admit that. But the point is that you have someone like Jeff who loves Tiny Desk concerts and would be the perfect user of that product. And you could say that us creating an app on a platform built by Apple, which is an innovative company, that was a really innovative thing for us to do to allow you to watch videos. And you know, if the design is a helpful design, then all those things would tell you it's innovative. Guess what? Jeff loves Tiny Desk concerts and has no idea, and that is not a part of his life. That app is not a part of his life. Is that innovative? Okay, so, and that's launch of NPR Music as a concept happened in 2007. We launched the app not too long after that. We launched a news app. We launched an open API so that others could develop apps and other products based on our content. And that's where I came along and started at NPR in 2006. We have an NPR alum in the audience here. So let's see, a news app, let's see, We launched a product called Project Song. We launched an iPad app, and that we were on the iPad the day the product launched, the actual device launched. So you could say maybe we're innovative because we had the foresight to be involved with that. How many of you bought an iPad and rarely use it? Okay? So, you know, our iPads, you know, in terms of getting news content, the most important thing for us strategically right now. We're certainly developing for the iPad, but it may not be that important in terms of how many people actually experience NPR or find it. Launched a responsive design. We were very early in terms of news sites that had a responsive site. How many of you go to npr.org ever? Okay. How do you land there? Like, what takes you there? Anyone?
Social and direct.
Facebook? Okay. So probably a lot of Facebook users because you like us on Facebook, right? Or are you seeing other people post things? Both. Okay. We moved to a new building. We launched Invisibilia. How many of you know what Invisibilia is? A lot of you. Great. A lot of podcast listeners know it. And we launched NPR One in 2014. So NPR One, for those of you who don't know, it is described as like Pandora for news, but it's a lot more than that. It's actually a platform where you can listen to podcasts, but mostly it's sort of a very simple audio experience where you can just hit a play button and you get often a local station experience if you're in a market that has a station that is partnering with us for this service, where you can get a mix of national and local news. It starts to learn sort of what you might, you know, enjoy listening to, but it also is hand curated by someone who's deciding, much like the folks who create the news programs like Morning Edition or All Things Considered, decide sort of what's a good flow of stories. So it's this very hand curated experience. Okay. So this is back in 2009, an article in Fast Company, will NPR save the news? So this idea, again, perception that NPR is doing some things through digital smarts, through its nonprofit structure. In other words, it has some advantages in terms of how it can operate. And good old-fashioned shoe leather just might save the news. Have we saved the news? I'm not asking anyone to answer that question. All right, so if you come to the NPR building, and I encourage you all to do that, there are tours every day at 11 o'clock. You can sign up online. But there's an exhibit that kind of shows you the history of NPR. And I haven't really read these closely, but the other day I was like, well, let me see, how the digital products have fit into that. This is early on a quote from someone. NPR went from being a faceless organization to one with a website and a face and a better dialogue with the audience. So there's that term, you got a face for radio. We had to figure out what is NPR, what is a visual representation of NPR? What does NPR look like? And that's something that Liz Danzico, our creative director, that's one of the things she's really tasked with figuring out, like, what does NPR look like? The Tiny Desk. So the Tiny Desk is unique to NPR. It sprang out of who we are here and wanting to share that. And this is Anya Grunman, who's now the head of programming at NPR. So she's responsible for all the podcasts and NPR Music. We've launched lots of podcasts. You all talked about that. This is a huge podcast listening audience. The responsive site and NPR One. So again, let's perceive that we're perceived as innovative. how did our culture support that? So this is the mission or the vision of the digital media group with NPR. Drive best-in-class product development efforts to extend the utility, reach, and perceived customer value of the NPR digital experience. All right, so how many of you have statements like this in your organization that you go by? How helpful is it? Somewhat helpful? Every day, do you think about the statement? A lot of no's. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a statement of what we want to be and what we want to do. I'm just looking for some direction as someone who produces and creates products for NPR of what the hell it means to be innovative. All right, so around 2010, 2009 area, we started using Agile. This is a little a Agile. How many of you use Agile? All right, I'm sure you've been to a million conferences where people have talked about Agile, so I'm not gonna do that here, right? I'll just say that we've put into place practices. At the same time, we were obviously hiring people that we felt could be an incredibly impactful part of the organization. We moved into a new building in 2013, I think. So obviously all these other things are happening. I'm not gonna talk about those things because those things are not obvious, and I think we've done them really well, but they're sort of a baseline of how an organization might support innovation. This is how our teams are structured. So we have product teams. On the right here, you can see there's a Scrum Master, there's developers, there's editorial, there's analytics, we have sponsorship involved, product management, design UX, and these are some of the roles. So this is not, probably not unfamiliar to any of you. So lean UX, lean startup, behavioral design. I really brought some of these methods to NPR and some of our work with the responsive site, and that has, and the NPR One team is using lean startup methods. And we're doing collaborative design. We're understanding what our KPIs are. We're writing problem statements. We're gathering evidence, declaring assumptions. We're doing all these things. We're sketching as a team. So we're doing some things that I hope all of you are doing. Again, baseline stuff, right? But the problem statement, understanding what the problem actually is, I cannot emphasize enough how important this is to be able to state, our current product, if you're redesigning something or if you're replacing something or if you're supplementing your products with some core product was designed to do this, we observe that it's not doing something and the impact of it not doing something. Okay, so we have a music app out there that has Tiny Desk concerts inside it. Someone who loves Tiny Desk concerts is not finding them or watching them when he just told me that he would love to watch them as often as possible and show them to people. To show Dan Deacon orchestrating or a dance party in the middle of the NPR offices. How can we measurably improve something so that Jeff is watching Tiny Desk concerts as soon as they come out and sharing them with people because he's energized and he loves them and he wants other people to love them. So assumptions as culture. So there's Jeff. That's okay, he's apologizing. I was gonna use him as the guinea pig at the beginning. So assumptions. Presenting evidence for something, every member of the team contributing these assumptions based on what you know, based on your experience. Maybe you've been in an organization for a long time and had that historical experience. Maybe you're new to an organization, but you have perspective on what their products are and you can offer something. Maybe you're a developer and you know that something really complicated will cause a huge delay in the release of that product and it has to be understood by the rest of the team. Then how might you communicate that as assumption? It may not be true. You may just be Chicken Little and be afraid of something, but at least how do you state it so the whole team understands it and so the whole team can weigh in on it? So everyone sort of has a baseline of understanding, so you kind of start to share the same brain. And killing arguments. So nothing has to be an argument if everything is stated as an assumption. I assume this, you assume that. If those things happen to be in conflict, we should probably run an experiment, right? But we're only going to run an experiment on the things that are important enough that are either really risky to our organization or that are, very unknown, right? So either they're risky, if they're both risky and unknown, and your assumption, you've got assumptions that are kind of in conflict, then that probably means you should build something and test it and set it up as an experiment. We hired an innovation accountant, so specifically right now for the NPR1 team, but this is a model that we're using more broadly, we hope to use more broadly in the future, and this comes from lean startup methods, which is you have someone whose responsibility to be embedded with product teams to really measure things, to set up experiments, to work with the rest of the team. Nick Dupre, I don't know if any of you know him, he's a great guy. And a really good musician, he's in a band, a local band. Something we've been using lately are method cards. Have any of you ever used or even know what method cards are? A few people, right? So again, a tool of the trade. I'd say this goes a little beyond baseline because we've seen how we have a large organization with some people who are reporters who may not really understand what we're doing on the digital side, but guess what? They create. They're storytellers. They're information architects, honestly, right? They're structuring information to be understood. We're everywhere, right? And we're around the world. So this was introduced by IDEO in 2003. These are basically simple statements or concepts that you can put on cards. This was based on some research we've been doing on millennials, and we started with like 30 of these, but we boiled them down or distilled them down into a number where we could say, okay, here's a deck of cards, and we give them to our reporters, we give them to our teams, we give them to our election team or our podcast team, and the things they can reference. So as they're doing work, they understand what we've learned about research with millennials to understand, well, how am I crafting the story? How am I dealing with it on social media? What are all the things that I'm doing to tell the story? So an example of this that just came out recently is we had a author interview on Fresh Air who was interviewing someone fairly controversial, and the person crafting the NPR1 experience of the story was able to say, oh, I looked at this method card about perception. How is NPR perceived? Are we perceived as being very balanced and representing all sides of something? So she was able to say, well, you know what? We've also done an interview with that controversial person. Let's have the listener of NPR1. We know that they listened to that book author interview. Let's say, hey, NPR1 listener, we saw that you listened to this one interview. How would you like to actually hear from that person, right? So we're able to show that we can craft a product, both the editorial and the actual digital product, to deliver those multiple perspectives. We hold something, I think about 3 times a year, called Serendipity Days. Did we have Serendipity Days when you were at NPR? So this was after Rick was there, but we have an opportunity, this is like 3 days where everyone stops their work and you pick a project. Could be really anything that at least applies to NPR in some way. And it's basically to tap, and this is a statement from one of the founders of this, to tap their creative ideas of the overall team, create a vehicle for exploring cool, interesting ideas that might or might not go anywhere, and just to have fun, right? And these are the buttons, so we get a designer, and that's, could be really anyone to design a button for that day, and everyone comes away with a button. And you have to present your work. So the idea is you spend 2 days, 3 days with either just doing a project on your own or finding other people to do a project, and you present what you created at the end. A lot of prototypes for things, a lot of working code, a lot of concepts, a lot of failures, honestly. And someone found this story. So who wakes up to the Writer's Almanac? you. If you listen to your clock radio, which is something that people used to do all the time, that's how a lot of people listen to NPR in the morning. Not as many people do that anymore because you wake up with the alarm on your phone, right? But for those of you who did, you may, because it's so early in the morning for many of you, you may just know it in your dreams, right? It's Garrison Keillor talking about a poet. So anyways, one of the episodes, the word serendipity is coined. He's talking about 1754, the faculty or phenomenon of finding valuable or agreeable things not sought for. So the unexpected. Is innovation the unexpected? Does that qualify something as innovative? We also have something called Zen Out Days. So this is Kim Bryant, who's our director of operations, she leads all the project managers. She started this, and I love it because it happens there's 2 times a year where you really have no responsibilities other than to do something that sort of re-energizes you. 2 to 3 days of non-project work will allow you to use your brain in a different way and hopefully refresh and energize you. So what she's trying to achieve is for the members of our team to achieve what's called flow state. So how many of you have read the book Flow? How many of you have heard a conference talk or someone talking about what flow is, right? So it's almost funny how much it's talked about, but I think it's still incredibly important to really do well something that requires a lot of concentration, so existence is temporarily suspended, and he's talking about musicians, how musicians reach this flow state. So the idea is that your brain can only process so much at one time. So the reason when we have 3 people talking at the same time, maybe in one of those meetings you have where people are arguing instead of just calmly offering assumptions, that you can't process that. So if you're able to tune out all these other things, and this is sort of like the concept of how meditation works, right? If you can sort of observe your breath or observe something, where all the chaos kind of goes away, then you can experience flow. And if you've ever experienced that feeling of a flow state in your work, it's euphoric, it's wonderful. And I finally, I think, figured out how to pronounce his name. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I believe. Let's see. Okay, so we've accumulated all these practices and a culture, I think, that could help us continue to innovate. And we may always need to care about how we're perceived, right? Does the market perceive us as innovative? For many of you, your funding may be dependent upon that, or your success as a company if you're working for a company. For yourself, even looking for careers, you feel like you need to be perceived, and perception sometimes is reality. Certainly, that's very important. But generally, those are based on definitions that we don't control. But our own evolving definition of innovation is what's important. So let's go back to the first question when I had Gary up here. But I'll change how I'm going to ask that question. All right. For those of you who believe NPR fits into your life on a daily or weekly or some basis, is it because of innovation? How many of you would say yes? Okay, just a few of you. All right. Does NPR fit into your life despite a lack of innovation? Why?
I enjoy listening, so it doesn't matter what medium it comes from. I'm gonna.
Okay.
So whether it's innovative or not, I'm gonna.
Right. You still have access to a radio if you wanted to buy one, or you dig the one out of your closet, or the one that's already on your bedside, right? Gary says he still flips on the dial instead of the low end of the dial in his car.
I think you have a core value of quality.
Okay.
Trying to do real reporting that's actually be considered, classic.
Right.
That's what keeps me coming back is really more the really trying to tell the truth and do a good job.
Yep. So how did you form that impression?
I guess over time experiencing the product and
Okay.
trying it.
How did you first experience the product?
I honestly can't remember.
Okay.
Listening in.
Okay. But it's been ubiquitous for you in some ways. And that might be because it was in the car, it might be because of a tribal association, right? So your tribe listened to it, meaning your tribe, maybe your parents as a tribe were listening to it. Or maybe it's that your friends as a tribe had liked it on Facebook and you saw it. There are many different paths in terms of that tribal association. But for some people, that story doesn't exist, right? So I did some research with someone who is from France, right, who now lives in this country, and he discovered NPR sort of serendipitously, and it had nothing to do with tribe, it had nothing to do with nationality, but now he listens to it often. So that's a whole different story. Someone had a, yep.
I was going to say it fits into my life because of
Okay.
Because in addition to my regular radio listening, I like Kojo, for example, so I listen to WNU. But the NPR app on my iPad, not NPR One, has a very convenient button for hourly news.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that every day. And so that's because of innovation. Despite innovation, I'm really tired of the constant promos that get me to download the NPR One app. And I have to delete it from my iPad.
Yep. Okay. So that's, I mean, and I designed the iPad app, so. But I'm saying one of the things that I made sure that was in there was a very easy to find hourly news button, because I know through talking with people like you and observing people like you that you sometimes just want to, like, you wake up, you kind of want to know what's going on in the world, or you want to just that brief update, but you want to hear it, you want to hear the voices, and that's the way you operate. NPR One might be a better option for other people for different reasons. So that's all something we need to understand. So innovation, again, your definition of innovation is that it is, I think that it's useful to you, but the fact that we've developed an app that we maybe think is innovative, or we want other people to think is innovative because we want them to use it, or because it matches how their other technology works. If they can skip things in Pandora, then if you can swipe people on Tinder and whatever, that all these things are leading to behaviors that we think, well, everyone thinks that's innovative. Maybe that's the way to do it. For you, innovation might be something different that has to do with actual consumption of news and understanding. What's that? Okay.
I was going to say that there's something fundamentally innovative about how NPR does its content that sort of harkens back to the first speaker about the experience, because it's almost a one-on-one dialogue. You almost think you know the newscasters, and it harkens back to that direct dialogue between the presenter and the audience.
Yep.
And I think that creates an aura of innovation about NPR.
Okay. All right. Someone else back there?
So the innovation I liked was obviously getting access to a lot of NPR programming I even didn't know about because I don't listen to radio that much. Like Writers Almanac, for instance. But the thing I don't like, you used to be able to split up fresh air into segments, and I would listen to the segments I'm interested in. Now it's all one big piece, and you have all your sponsored stuff stuck in there, so I have to wade through that.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. So there were some reasons for doing that, but the idea that, you could say that making Fresh Air a podcast, right? That happened a long time after Fresh Air existed as a thing, right? Terry Gross has been doing this for years and years and years. So you benefited from this innovation, but now something that could be called innovation to someone else's, with someone else's definition, has now, in your perception, taken a step back. Okay, is NPR currently absent from your life because of a lack of innovation, right? So you no longer use your clock radio that wakes you up with the news, and you don't feel like anything else we've developed has fit into your life in any other way? Or some story like that? Okay, maybe not. Is anyone? Okay.
I might say yes. I listened to Fresh Air, pre-internet days on the radio, and it's everything. I'm on Sirius, deep tracks. I'm not scanning the dial as much now that Sirius XM is taking over. So.
Okay. So you feel like you've kind of lost something a little bit, right? How many of you would say, if I brought you on stage and asked you how NPR fits in your life, if at all, would say it doesn't really? Okay? And so sometimes that's because of maybe we haven't adapted to, and built products that fit into your life, or it might be that there are other things that distract you. What would make us innovative, both now and into the future? According to whatever definition you had or have now changed based on what you've heard today, what would make us innovative?
Keep doing what you're doing.
Okay, so in your mind, innovation means continuing to be accessible, to support the values that we have, to do the kind of reporting we do, to deliver them in the ways we're delivering them, as long as those technology products, as long as you still have an iPhone or an Android or whatever, or a computer, et cetera. Anyone else?
Oculus Rift.
Okay? And we have some of those at work, floating around the music department. I've seen them. I don't know what we're doing with them yet, but maybe. Okay. All right. So because you don't have to tell me what product we should develop, but what about wearable technology feels innovative to you in terms of, with our limited resources, that tells you that NPR should really be doing something with wearables? What would that be? Again, not the product, but just like, why wearables? Right. And we did that. We were part of that race. Yeah, but some could say that Apple Watch hasn't really taken off in the way Apple, have they put out another version of it yet? Do they have plans to yet? I don't know. But it was innovative, maybe, according to some definition.
Yeah, I think one way to be innovative would be to work with partners to associate some of your products to your search. For example, the App Store associate content.
Right. Okay. So thinking about how people search for things, thinking about what people are looking for, if they do know certain terms or are familiar with something about related to public radio or to NPR, that they more easily find the thing that is going to give them, so that maybe they develop some daily habits. Okay. All right. So that was a big question. A lot of you gave me some great ideas and had some great perspective on what that might be. Okay. So I work there, right? So what am I going to do? And honestly, the reason I structured this talk or came up with this topic is that I'm concerned, right? I want NPR to be a part of people's lives, but what I hear when I talk to people who are younger than I am, even if they were backseat babies, is, oh yeah, I know what NPR is. So because they've had tribal exposure, their friend group, but I'll be frank, a lot of those people are white. On some platforms, a lot of those people are men. On some other platforms, or certain podcasts, over 60-something% women. But I think those tribal associations form a higher probability that someone's going to listen to NPR content or read something on our website or like us on Facebook. So I need to help people make sense of this in my job, right? I need to make sense of it for myself, right? We could plan great products. We could build something with wearable. We have an NPR One app for Apple Watch, but we could be doing all these different things. But maybe that's just creating a product like our NPR Music app that has great Tiny Desk concerts on it that Jeff has never seen before, even though he would love to use it every day. We do this well, right? And our reporters do, because they are IAs. IAs are everywhere, right? The Information Architecture Institute's website says, a good IA helps people to understand their surroundings and find what they're looking for in the real world as well as online. Practicing information architecture involves facilitating the people and organizations we work with to consider their structures and language thoughtfully. So obviously, we practice these things when we design our products. Our reporters are doing this in their work, right? The voices on the air are doing this in the way they say the things they're saying. Like, it's all done, honestly, with some of the same practices, artifacts, and skills that we use in our professions. But I believe that you and I have the responsibility and the skills to define and communicate what innovation means. And I think it starts with your histories and values. So Bill Siemering was NPR's first director of programming. So when All Things Considered went on the air, he said this: National Public Radio will serve the individual. It will promote personal growth. It will regard the individual differences among men This was 1970. With respect and joy rather than derision and hate. But think about that. Think about if he was saying that as the director of programming, how often was someone on the air talking more about men than he was talking about women? So how many of our users, how many of you have listened to our content, saw something on our website, 10 years ago or yesterday, and maybe you didn't feel represented or you felt like something turned you away from that? It will celebrate the human experience as infinitely varied rather than vacuous and banal. It will encourage a sense of active, constructive participation rather than apathetic helplessness. And today, the mission of NPR in partnership with its member stations is to create a more informed public, one challenged and invigorated by a deep understanding and appreciation of events, ideas, and culture within the United States and across the globe. NPR reports, produces, acquires, and distributes news, information, and other content that meet the highest standards of public service in journalism and cultural expression. So recently, Mark Memmott, who's on the reporting side but really looks at the ethics of the organization and the practices of the reporters, created an ethics guide. And you can find this on ethics.npr.org. When I read through this and talked more with Mark about it, I was like, you know what, I actually want a personal ethics guide. Like, I want to create this kind of document for my own life. It seems obvious, right? It seems obvious for an organization, but if you look at it, accuracy, and there's a whole description with each of these that's on the website, accuracy, fairness, completeness, honesty, independence, impartiality, transparency, accountability, respect, and excellence. So remember what I said earlier about intention, about how our brains are constantly detecting intention? I think these get at good intention, and that will come through if the people creating our content and our products have these things in mind. So again, I'm trying to gather all the things, we're back to our responsibility as IAs to define what innovation means. Just as if you were doing a project to design something or build something or architect something, this is just one piece. I'm assuming, so back to the idea of assumptions, I'm assuming that this is really important as part of communicating that. Again, back to that display in the lobby, and like I said, I encourage you all to come. Bill SIEMERING, again, 1970. We're going to talk to our listeners the way we talk to our friends. When you listen to the Serial podcast, what does it sound like she's doing? Telling you a story. Right. Did you say selling or telling? Okay, you did say something. Okay. It's the voice. This is Susan Stamberg. How many of you know who Susan Stamberg is? So she is one of the founding sort of presences at NPR. It's the voice that puts you in the presence of a person and a life. Remember what Mick said when he showed the picture of the real person? Listening to the voices of NPR and the people we interview is to hear the sound of decades passing. And to me, that means it's the sound of human life and human intention, but it's also the sound of right now, right? And so innovation also needs to consider, what feels right and innovative right now. I believe our greatest innovations at NPR, but in general with all the products we use, it should enable behaviors leading to more human connection. So when you see that Tiny Desk concert and you desperately want to show it to a friend of yours to show them Dan Deacon making a dance party happen, that's what we're talking about. And greater understanding. Especially regarding people or topics you didn't even know you cared about. But the you here, we're not just talking about our current audience, because there are so many people who have not had that kind of tribal exposure to NPR. They may have had cultural exposure. So how many of you have seen an SNL skit about NPR? Okay? So Alec Baldwin again. I'm going to bring. I don't know how Alec Baldwin has made it into this day. There's an old SNL skit with Alec Baldwin that I'm not going to mention here, but you can watch it. So there might be cultural awareness of what NPR is, but honestly, I think that perception to some people is boring, kind of stuck-up people. What's that? Yes. Okay, so I have come up with an assumption. This is just an assumption that I think are the guidelines that NPR should think about in order to continue to innovate. Number one, focus on behaviors we can change, right? So you have a smartphone. Maybe you even want to listen to the radio because you're bored, or listen to a podcast or whatever, but your headphones are tangled up in your pocket and it's going to take a lot of effort to do that, right? So, some things are just, you can't really overcome, but maybe in the future there are wearables where that won't be an issue, right? 2, enable readiness with a product or service. So do you have the app downloaded? Do you get an email that gives you news every morning and that triggers you in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be triggered, so that you're set up? But the ultimate readiness is that you've had some exposure and all the things that you talked about why you value NPR. If someone has not had that experience, we don't have a chance with them. Influence daily routine. So the idea that, if you're commuting, you have the trigger of seeing the radio dial, you know where the low end of the dial is, it's there for you. But thinking about how people spend their day, at what points of the day can they pull out their headphones? At what points of the day is it appropriate to be listening to something? Quantify our missed audience. So being able to tell the other people in an organization, or even tell yourself or remind yourself that, what is the makeup of the people who like us on Facebook? What is the conditional probability that if they liked us on Facebook, they will actually see a story and then listen to a story? What is the conditional probability if they don't like us on Facebook that they'll do that same thing? Being able to tell the story of how people are not, of why people are not your audience on a daily basis, and how that can be a travesty. Increasing tribal and cultural awareness. So if I know that maybe the reason people aren't listening to NPR or don't even know about NPR has something to do with something in their childhood, or something right now that has more to do with their connections with other people than it has anything to do with what kind of apps we develop, or how good our website is, or how much marketing we do, or how many stations we're on air on. Show evidence of our ethics in our products. So if our brains are constantly detecting intention, that if our products, the product design itself does not express that in some way, and I'm not going to tell you what that is because I'm still trying to figure it out, right? But I know that those qualities need to come through in everything we do, even the visual design. To accept that we do not control context, right? So our stories can be embedded on other websites because we want to have as much research as possible, but for someone who doesn't know what NPR is, they're just seeing the stories. They don't care about the NPR brand. They've never been to the website. They may never go to the website. But there's something that still needs to come through where maybe the next time they hear that voice, they'll know it's us. And the last is to form trust through voice. And that voice is not just the voices on the radio, but it might be the voice on NPR One, the voices you're hearing. And maybe that voice needs to be different because the listeners that are coming there are different, and what they trust is different than what most traditional radio listeners trust. So I want you to think about, what will you structure, order, create, all the things that were good? What will you architect to help others make sense of things? The list I just showed you, I'm not ready to go show that to someone, to my boss or to someone at NPR yet, right? This is not like those methods cards, which are a practical tool that we're actually distributing right now to people throughout the organization. I'm just trying to understand this myself. So your work can be intensely personal so that you can make sense of why you're doing what you're doing, and so that when you actually do your design work, or when you actually do your design work, when you design something, you know that you're being innovative. And you don't really care if anyone else thinks that's innovative or not, because you haven't built a prototype or something, or you haven't done a serendipity day where you've created a product, right? You may be I've been working on this player project for almost the last 2 years. It's coming along very well from my perspective, but we didn't launch it in 2 months, and we didn't race to do it because the design that I wanted to fulfill the goals I wanted to achieve is taking that long. But I still feel it's innovative because that's my definition, because I'm trying to connect people, I'm trying to get those voices and those opportunities for listening with a product that's easier to use and is, how many of you hate that little pop-up flash player that we have on our website? It's pretty bad. So that's coming. She hates it. Why do you hate it? It's Flash. You don't have to answer that question. But like I said, think about how well all of your skills apply to helping, just knowing for yourself what it means to be innovative. Thanks.